Okay, now I'm on part 2 of my presentation. We left off at building the Berlin Wall. Here is a video to show how the building of the wall started, and just to recap everything that I said.
Are you guys pregnant? No, I'm not. Passenger is at least 10 weeks pregnant. I wanted my girls to live a better life.
Celebrations in Germany to mark an anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. After the end of the Second World War, this city became the front line for a different kind of war, the Cold War. For nearly 40 years, Europe was divided between the democracies of the West and the communist states of the East, and Berlin was where the two sides met. When Nazi Germany was defeated in 1945, Berlin was divided up into 4 parts by the Allied powers and the Soviet Union. As post-war Germany started to rebuild, 2 countries were formed from the rubble: a free market and democratic West Germany, and a communist-controlled East Germany under the influence of Russia. Despite growing tensions between West and East Berlin, Berliners were able to move between the 2 halves of the city to go to work, school, or visit family and friends, until one night in August 1961. Overnight, East German soldiers sealed off the border between the 2 halves of the city.
I watched workmen supervised by troops putting the finishing touches to the cement curtain through which no East German can pass.
The first and main shock we had was 61. When they built a wall right through a city. It was not an ordinary wall around a city to protect it from enemies, but it was a prison wall through a city. And we didn't believe this. We thought there is a responsibility of all the 4 allies, and they will hold this city together. But nobody did anything.
Boyfriends and girlfriends, parents and children, whole families suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of the wall. Even streets became divided.
The wall divided the street. So, for example, a young man and a young girl who loved each other couldn't see each other anymore when the wall was built, because the wall was built exactly at the street. And neighbors, families, they could see each other, but they couldn't go to each other because the wall divided the street. And I think this is a symbol for divided Berlin, for divided Europe, and for divided world at that time.
Houses along the border were bricked up. People made desperate bids to escape across the border into the West. Some even died trying. Teenager Peter Fechter was the first to lose his life, shot by border guards.
We saw Peter Fechter bleeding, and nobody helped him. He was right in front of the American soldiers. Nobody helped him. It was on the other side of the world. And it was a question of war and Cold War. Not peace, but Cold War was better than war.
Over the next few years, the authorities strengthened the barriers, and it became known as the Berlin Wall.
You can see the first barrier where, after the graveyard, after this, there was electric fence, but if you touched it, you had no idea what happened if you are somebody who wants to flee, but the soldiers in the watchtower, they got a signal that there is somebody. And then comes the inner wall, which was not so high, and behind this inner wall, there was something like on the floor with needles on it. So if you jumped over the inner wall, you landed in needles, 10 centimeter high needles. Then the original death strip with bunkers and soldiers, they got permittance from their system, from the government, to shoot to everybody who is near there.
As the Berlin Wall became harder to cross, people came up with more and more ambitious ideas to help friends and families escape from East Berlin. This house is where one of the most
Okay, now protests and demonstrations. In the late 1980s, a series of radical political changes took place in some Eastern Bloc countries, Poland and Hungary, allowing their citizens greater freedoms. In August 1989, Hungary opened its border with Austria. During September 1989, more than 13,000 East Germans traveled to the open border and crossed into Austria in the west. To stop this, the East German government ordered the Hungarians to stop more East Germans crossing the border. At the same time, the East German government stopped all travel between East Germany and Hungary. In cities all over East Germany, protest demonstrations broke out. People were calling for greater freedoms, freedom to travel, free elections, and the freedom to take control of their own lives. The East German government realized that the mass demonstrations could not be brought under control using force. On November 9th, the decision was taken to allow East German citizens to travel freely between East and West Germany, including Berlin. Now the fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall happened nearly as sudden as its rise. On November 9, 1989, East German government official released a statement opening all checkpoints. People were in shock. Very quickly, people surrounded the wall from both sides. Some began chipping at the wall with hammers. There was a huge celebration along the Berlin Wall, with people hugging, kissing, singing, cheering, and crying. Overall consequences. The Berlin Wall divided many families. Many people in the East were unable to commute to their jobs in the West. West Berliners demonstrated against the wall. The East German government claimed the wall was an anti-fascist protection barrier. During the wall's existence, there were around 5,000 successful escapes into West Berlin. Varying reports claim that either 192 or 239 people were killed trying to cross the wall, and many more were injured. And the end.